Mm.
Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar Applying Test Optional, Explore Your Options. My name is Tetiana Kotko and I'm based in Education USA Ukraine in Kiev. And I would like to ask our esteemed speakers to please introduce themselves.
I guess I'll go first.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Pat Roble, and I'm an admissions counselor for international students at Binghamton University, State University of New York. I'm happy to be here.
Go ahead, Dr. Arun.
Sure thing. So good day, everyone. I am Dr. Arun Pravitasari. You can call me Arum. I am institutional relations specialist at ETS for TOEFL, and I'm so glad I'm here. We received so many questions already in the morning. So yeah, it's good to be in this session to explain about this optional thing.
Welcome.
I'll echo that from here, and hello to my dear colleagues. And Tatiana, thank you very much for having us here today. My name is Peter Lundby. I am the Director of International Admission at Temple University in Philadelphia on the East Coast in the United States.
Okay, thanks. So let's get started. So the first question is, what is test optional? Yeah, please go ahead.
Do you want me to start with that, Tatiana?
Yeah.
So I would say that there's the formal definition, and I think we probably have 4,000 different answers to it in the US, but the general answer is that test optional was created as an option for students who may not do fundamentally well on these standardized tests that we have, such as SAT or ACT. It basically is not supposed to mean that you shouldn't test. It means that you're supposed to test, and then when you get the result, find out how that test result reflect your academic character, your academic personality, if you would say that, and then decide on whether you should use that as part of your application process. Basic answer is if your test result was low and your academic is high, then it doesn't reflect very well your academic character. Now, if you have a high score, of course, and you are a high achieving academic score, then it supports your academic standards. So, but it also just allows students to say, well, I can't test because it's COVID and the test center is not open, so I can submit my application as a test optional student. I don't know, Pat, if you will add anything to that.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to add, because I've noticed already from the questions that international students are asking us, that when we talk about test optional, I think for the majority of US schools who have used SAT or ACT, we are referring only to test optional for SAT or ACT. Some of the international students who are looking at tests for testing English proficiency, that is not what we're talking about. We're talking typically, when we talk about test optional, we are talking about being test optional for SAT or ACT. I also think it's important to recognize that not all USA universities have required SAT or ACT. So the most important piece of information I would like to impart is that the students should check the website of every college or university to which they are applying to see what their requirements are. For example, there are some universities and schools that have medical schools attached to them, and for early assurance or something like this, they would require SAT or ACT. So even within a university, it's important to make sure that the program to which you are applying is an SAT or ACT test optional program. Essentially, test optional gives you control over your application. At Binghamton, for example, we ask you to tell us whether or not you wish to submit your SAT or ACT. We have long been an SAT or ACT school. For last year and now again for this year, for fall 2022, we will not be requiring the SAT or ACT. But that being said, last year 50% of our applicants did submit SAT or ACT. The beauty of it this year, as with last year, is that you, as the student, have the control. It is your decision. And as Peter pointed out, if you're an excellent student and you do not test well, that's a good reason not to submit when you have this opportunity. I think that's a very wise decision. But if you're an excellent student and you do test well, then submit both. And that it's as simple as that. The other thing is to make sure that the program at the university to which you are applying does not in itself require an SAT or ACT.
Thank you so much. So
So
the next, yeah, go
I
ahead.
think I can say something. I think I do agree with both of you, Pat and Peter, here. 2 points actually about the test optional movement, making use the standardized test score like SAT or ACT as an option for admission consideration. And also, Pat, I do agree with you that English language proficiency tests were never included in this group. This is to highlight because somehow higher education admissions or faculty personnel, they need you to show your English proficiency when you want to enter their program. So yeah, I think this is clear here that language proficiency tests such as TOEFL has never been included in this test optional movement.
May I make a shout out to the language though, because the schools, those of us who have an ESL center or an IELP or something, we very often have what we call conditional admission, which is essentially a test optional for languages. So given that we have you here from ETS, I have had that in my entire career in higher education. I've had an ESL center for my usage. At Temple, we used a term for this, and we actually called that term test flexible. And the test flexible refers to our language programs where we do not require language scores for conditional admission, or if you have been in an English medium, we will consider that as a language efficient, so that you do not have to submit test scores like TOEFL or IELTS. So,
Yes.
so just a shout out for that area.
Yeah. Also, if you are from international baccalaureate programs, you have been in the English programs before you continue for your bachelor degree. Yeah, usually you are exempted from submitting English language proficiency. Yes. Totally.
I think it depends on the university because for us, we still require a test.
Oh, okay.
And to complicate this even more, which is the exact opposite of what we're trying to do here, for those international students who wish, and I have seen many already in early action applications, who have said, I do not wish to have my SAT scores considered for admission purposes, but I do wish to have my SAT EBRW score or my ACT English score considered for satisfying English proficiency. And at Binghamton, you can do that. You can say, I do not wish to have my SAT or ACT scores considered for admission purposes, but I certainly can have the EBRW score considered for English proficiency from the SAT, or English out of ACT considered as a score for satisfying English proficiency. So again, the important thing is to check the university's website to see how they are treating SAT, ACT. This is probably I will say this at least 20 times during this session, I'm sure.
Thanks, Patricia. Yeah, that's really important thing to notice. And thank you for pointing out that TOEFL is not negotiable, right? So it's not about English proficiency. It's about something else. So the next question is test optional a good fit for me? What would you suggest to such a question from our students? How should I approach this question?
I think Peter said it originally when he said that if you're a strong student and your SAT or ACT scores are not particularly strong, or if you have looked at the profile of the students who get admitted to the university to which you are applying, and you see that your scores do not fit in that range, then I wouldn't submit. But if you're a strong student and your scores fit in that range as evidenced on that university's profile, then why not?
Patricia, she just spilled the beans, as we would say in certain part. This is a secret that we're not supposed to tell you, but it's actually an obvious secret. Most universities are going to have the profile on the website, and you can look for it, or you should ask how you fit into the university profile. What does the average student look like? What does an honor student look like? What is their profile? And when we say profile, grade point average and the TOEFL, the SAT, ACT. And just like Patricia said, that in answering the question whether you should submit, if your score is on par with that or low, because what is a low score, right? Well, that depends on the institution. So that's what I normally say. And I tell students, hey, this is a secret. Don't tell anybody. This is especially for you, that this is the profile that you want to mirror yourself against. But I think in most institutions, what we consider a decent score or not, it's probably around the same. I think, certainly probably around the 1300 mark or above, you get into the good, better, best scores. And below, well, they're good scores, but not necessarily outstanding in that higher score range.
Great, thanks so much. So I think the question which many people ask then, how my application will be assessed if I'm not submitting scores? So could you please elaborate on that? Because I think that's there are lots of talks about it.
Okay, I'll go first on this. The SAT and ACT is one piece of information. I think if we were to maybe rank the pieces of information, the most important academic information is how you have done for the last 3 years of your secondary school education. At least that's what Binghamton looks at. The last 3 completed years. And we don't look at test scores. If you're, for example, taking an O-level or an IGCSE exam, that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at how did you perform in your secondary school every single day as measured by your grade reports issued to us as transcripts from grades typically 9, 10, and 11 if you're currently in 12th grade, or if you're in grade 13, 10, 11, and 12. But we would look at the transcripts. How did you do in your class work? Did you choose, if you had the option to choose rigorous courses, did you choose any rigorous courses? So we're looking at the rigor of your curriculum if you had options, and then how did you perform in that curriculum? And that's probably academically the number one criteria that I think we all look at. SAT and ACT would only either suggest to us that this looks pretty good. You're going to perform like that going on, at least for your first year. But it also is just an indicator of perhaps you were not as excellent as a student as you should have been, but perhaps you have more potential that just has not been demonstrated to date. And different universities will respond to that differently. However, we're also looking for students who can make a contribution to our student body. So we are looking for talented students in the arts, in music, leadership. I mean, there are students who, during COVID especially, have done incredible services in their communities, working remotely or some in person. I'm always shocked at what I've read. So it's a holistic approach. When we talk about that, we mean that. So the value of the SAT or ACT score is not as significant as I think most students who are applying now are thinking about this. We probably admitted as many students without SAT or ACT as we did with SAT and ACT. So it's just another piece of information. The essay, your recommendation, the what your counselors have said about you, your teachers have said about you, and the way you write in your essay gives us such a good idea of who you are as a student, much more than an SAT or ACT.
I think if I can just chime in, and is absolutely what Patricia just mentioned as well. I will say, granted, and what we do is academic is the number one piece that we look at. The way that we look at it from institutions, I will say that there are probably 1,000 different ways in terms of how we rank the individual pieces in terms of what has a higher value. Just depends on what philosophy that we have at institutions itself. The question that was raised on the right side, and I don't know if we should answer those right away, if a student is submitting test scores but choose not to be viewed on the test scores, then we will not look at those test scores as part of the report. If you imagine when we do the work, if you have a test scores that was submitted somehow or was part of the report, but if you have chosen not to use that for your application, then we don't put it on our little calculation sheet. All of us as institutions, we're going to have some sort of a calculation sheet where we plot in some numbers or some notes or some grading. And if you say that you do not wish that test scores to be considered, even if you submit it, maybe it was used for language, like Patricia said, then in that case, then we do not take it into consideration as part of the actually academic review of the holistic approach of the application. So the answer to that is no, we will not check it if you do not wish it to be checked, even if it's there.
And to allay any fears about that, we do not even see it. Our operations team, if the score is submitted and the student does not want us to use it, when it comes to us in the file, it's not there. So it can be at our university, but it will not appear in the admissions committee's review.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, that's really important to know because some students do wonder, okay, if I have submitted, maybe you can kind of see it somehow, but you are not seeing that. So thanks for pointing
Can
this
I
out.
actually add also the opposite? I will say that if you have actually mentioned that you wish to submit test scores on your application, in most cases, I believe for most institutions, this is going to be a binding decision. So then this is also why we always recommend take the test before deciding on whether you're submitting test scores or not. Because if you make that decision prior to knowing your result, and then it turns out that you have a poor result, well, you're in a binding agreement that you're going to submit test scores. And then when you submit them or when they come to us and they're low, we don't really have a way to change that around because like Patricia said, once you have made that decision, it does become part of what we see and what we have to plug into the system in order to make a decision.
Thanks so much. So there is a question, if I'm understanding it correctly, motivational letters or essay, should you be pointing out or mentioning it in the essay or the statements about your decision whether you are taking the test or not?
Not at all.
Unless if it's part of your really cool essay about how you were either taking the test or not. But no, you don't have to explain for why or not. There is a place where you have educational progress. And if you had a reason like with academic downtime, you could also explain that when you took the test, that there's a reason behind that, might give some context. But at the end of the day, if you submit a poor test result when you do not have to, it is, like I mentioned, it is going to be binding.
Okay, thanks so much. And we have a question. If I apply to the music academy, what exams I should pass?
I don't know with you, Patricia, but I would say, I mean, for the general admission, it's the same. But if
Right.
you have a music program or an art program, you may be required by that college to submit additional documents. That's usually not test scores. That's usually a portfolio of some sort, or an audition or something like that. But for the admission part, the academic admission to the university, it is in most cases the same across the board.
I will again say for now the third time that you need to check what the university is requiring. So every university will probably be a bit different on this. So you need to check each university to make sure that you are meeting their requirements. We're giving you general information here. So, but you need to check.
There's
I
a
also,
question. Oh,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
no, I just wanted to point out that the other question that I think may be asked is, how do we know that you want us to use your SAT or ACT scores? And here again, I think each of us will have a different process for letting us know. For example, at Binghamton, we have within our application process, we have a form that you need to complete, and we will not review your application until that form is completed. So you could have everything submitted, and if you have not told us whether or not you intend to have your SAT or ACT scores utilized, we will not review your application. And I can tell you from last year that there were many students who had everything in, but were not completing the form. And we had to continue to go out and say, please complete the form, please complete the form, so we can move your application forward. Peter, how about for you?
You know what is funny you say that, Patricia, because last year was the highest completion rate that I have seen in my more than 15 years in higher education. So it was really a unique experience. I think we ended up only with like 8 or 9% of our students that were incomplete. And that is, that is an incredibly high rate of completion.
Thanks so much. So, we have like a general question. What exams should I pass, should I take? So it's like TOEFL or IELTS, right? And SAT or ACT. So that's are the basic requirements. And another question we have, what extracurriculars do universities appreciate when a student applying? I mean, in terms of test optional, what would you suggest?
Well, for the activities, I think in the test optional consideration, the most important bit is that if you choose to do test optional, different universities might have a different process that you have to do. Other universities might just look closer at your full package. But for example, in USA or in those extra parts that you would need to do as a test optional, you could write about those activities, right? Or one of those activities, the one I saw that was a question about the presidential campaign. That sounds like that would be a really, really interesting topic, right? It's one of those topics that we won't know that from your academic record. We won't know that from your test scores. So if you write about it in your essay, you write the story about how or why you were involved in that. That is an excellent format for the essay or for the test optional quiz question that you might have in that case. If the university does not have such a section, but they have an activity section, then there's also like, I don't know if there's a section for political campaign or activities or whatever. You should definitely add that so that we know that this is something that is important to you.
When I look at the holistic approach to an application and I look at the extracurriculars, I am looking to see if there is some correlation between what the student may indicate that they wish to study and the activities that they have participated in to date in their secondary school. Sometimes that isn't possible, but for example, if you are interested in science, I would expect that there would have been some sort of extracurricular activity related to science that you would have done. Similarly, in if you're interested in the social sciences, Model UN, for example, I would expect to see something like that if you're interested in political science. And yet it may not be possible. It may not be something that is offered at your institution. But again, I'm typically looking to see some sort of alignment. If you tell me that you are interested in studying a particular discipline, then I'd like to see where did that interest come from. That being said, 50% of students who enroll at Binghamton as first-year students are undecided, and we welcome that. We encourage that. I think the U.S. is one of the best places to come to explore because you do not need to know what it is that you want to study. We look for students who are looking to explore in those first 2 years. The other 50% who say that they know what they want to study, half of them change their mind anyway. So we only end up with maybe a quarter of students who really, and I think from the moment of conception, knew what it was that they wanted to study. So again, the relationship, when I'm reading an application as part of the committee, I sort of look to see where did all of this come from? How does it align? And that to me is what I'm mostly interested in seeing in your extracurriculars, in your essay, what's important to you, to let us have an idea of who you are as a person, as an individual.
So
Okay.
I just want to comment on the English language requirements, as you mentioned, the TOEFL or IELTS. This has been confusing for students indeed. But again, I'm going to copy what Pat said the sixth time now, that please do check the university and even the program's requirements, because even though university has a bigger, TOEFL score, for example, than M1, usually program has different, rules or requirements for English language program. So please do check the website of the programs that you want. So it saves you a lot of time. Yeah.
I also just want to say, as a former international student, the sheer flexibility of studying in the US that Patricia just mentioned is in my mind, one of the number one reasons. And we got Education USA here, of course. Why do you want to study in the US versus, for example, somewhere else? Just to go on with a question, if you don't mind, Tatiana, reading the question, which I think is probably the most important question for many students. If you are test optional, how does that impact my ability to get scholarships at an institution? And to repeat what Ms. Patricia has said a number of times already, you really need to read the fine print, because there are different institutions. There are institutions that do not require SAT or ACT in general, but if you want to compete for scholarships, then you must submit ACT and SAT. So it's not necessarily a test optional, it's just a process. And then there's others where it is that you have the test optional, but if you do that, maybe it has lesser weight for the scholarship. And then there's other institutions like Temple, where it does not matter whether you're submitting the test scores or the essay. What matters is the quality of either. So your test optional response will have to be in the same sort of like caliber as if you were scoring well on an SAT or an ACT. And we have a formula calculation for that we think it's pretty decent, it's pretty good, but it's probably not the same or the exact same as 3,000 other institutions. Sorry, Tatiana, I know you probably have a whole list of outlines here.
Thanks so much. So there is like a question. Some people assert that SAT is much more complex than TOEFL IELTS. Is it true?
Well, it's you, Dr. Arum. I mean, obviously, you can specify
I
TOEFL,
think
right?
students needs to know what's the difference between the two, SAT, ACT, and TOEFL and IELTS. They are totally two different types of tests, and they measure different things. That's what they have to know. SAT and ACT, for example, they actually not only measuring English, they also measures your knowledge of math and so on and so forth. While IELTS or TOEFL, it only measures English skills, reading, speaking, writing, and so on. So there are two totally different things that they measure, and you have to be careful because when you check English language requirements, I bet you will not see the SAT or ACT requirements there because you're probably just gonna see TOEFL or IELTS or other English tests. So this is the thing that students should really know and go deep into what is the test and why do you need the test and what the test measures, so that you don't do the test just for nothing. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, Patricia, go ahead.
The other point that I would just like to add to all of these wonderful comments is that you can always ask us. Every day we are answering emails from students, and they are asking questions just like this. So reach out to us. Don't make an error on this by not asking us. So it's better to ask and find out than to just assume.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's really great point. So be proactive, don't be shy. And we have another question. Is it meant that motivational letter or essay is not needed? No, the essay or motivational letter is needed, right? It is much needed. It's just not the place where to explain whether you take SAT or you are not taking it or ACT, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, motivational letter is very important. Okay, so another question. Is it true that I have to pass a math exam to study in the US?
I think that's a great question because the answer is both yes and no to that, right? To some extent, because as Patricia has said multiple times, read the fine prints, for example. So we could be a test optional school, but there could be a department where is if you want a scholarship for, say, for example, math or for science or something or for STEM, there's a good chance that they might want to see an SAT math subject test in order to be able to provide you scholarship outside of the admission process. So really just a number of different answers to that question. And again, remember what I just said was the subject test, the math subject test, which is something that you can take through College Board. Some schools are also going to have them sort of like a clap test. If you take the math test from the SAT and you score a certain score, then you may not have to do certain entry-level exams or placement exams or other things when you come to the university. Again, several thousand different answers to that question.
Yeah, it gets complicated too because of the differences in curricula that you see. So, for example, a student who is a A-level student or an IB student who is taking higher level math courses, we pretty much know the rigor of those kinds of courses. And so here, a program that may have in the past required SAT math or ACT math will not need to do that. And then there's also the sizes of programs. So certain programs, for example, like computer science, can be a smaller major. So at some universities and much more selective. So in those particular cases, again, for the 8th, 9th time, you have to check what it is that program is requiring in order to answer the question about SAT, ACT, or any kind of math test. Some of them might be subject matter math tests. There are universities that require that. So,
yeah, and we have a number of questions regarding the requirements for the scholarships and what to write in the essay, but these are a little bit out of the scope of our webinar. So I would invite the participants to ask those questions directly to the representatives and to the booth of the Education USA. Okay, do you guys have any questions? I mean, our participants, in terms of tests?
No, I think from our point of view, I mean, this is one of the beautiful part, like I just mentioned, when I applied for studying in the US back more than, well, what, close to 30 years ago or something like that, there was not a test optional option. And I wish there was, because I am one of those person who really, really needed that. It's, I think, as we are today, there's a lot of universities prior to COVID that were not test optional, and then they were sort of forced to make a decision when test taking was not possible. And I think probably about half of those are going to remain test optional post COVID, and the other half might go back to require SAT and testing. So I think it's even more important that it's not a universal thing, that there is test optional or that there's going to be it in the future. And like we have spoken about, you might be required to take the test, even at a test optional university school, for some program or for other things. For example, if you are an athlete, I know that the NCAA is not requiring it this year, but next year, I expect that they're going to go back to require it. So you could be able to submit SAT for the NCAA purposes, but be test optional for your university. So that's a really good example where we would get your score because we get your package from the NCAA, but we would not consider it if you are test optional. So just it multitude of complication, but at the end of the day, it's great because the student has options.
Yeah, and also a student needs to know that university do this holistic approach in the admission, so they don't have to worry whether or not they're going to use a test as an option or not. So basically, the holistic approach helps them and benefits also the students, right? So a university can see the potential of it, or students can also be flexible whether or not they're going to submit their a test or a standardized test. So you
Okay.
don't have to worry, guys.
Thank you so much. And another question, as an international student, is 7.5 points on the IELTS enough?
That's an awful score. No, I'm just kidding. I'm being sarcastic.
Just to add to that, though, I'm assuming that the 7.5 is a total score. So you have to also make sure that the individual sections will meet the requirements of the university to which you are applying. You could have a 7.5, but if you get a 5 on something as part of that, it may or may not be sufficient. So again, always look at what the university to which you are applying is requiring. That's the secret here, frankly.
It may also indicate different weaknesses to some extent. And I don't mean weaknesses in a bad way, but
yes,
areas
right.
where you might need more assistance. So for example, if your verbal is good and that's where you get your high score, but your writing or your comprehension is not so good, then maybe understanding whether the university that you're choosing, if they have a program or if they have a support where you can get maybe a little bit of support on those particular areas so that you do not feel the frustration or the burden when you come to the university.
Yeah, and also the program, like Pat said, for example, if you are taking engineering, for example, where they are waiting on the writing part, and then and your writing score is bad, even though you've got already the general point 7.5, then yeah, you still probably need to fulfill their requirements to get the writing part as the university wants. So yeah, check again the programs.
Tatiana, I don't know how much time we have, and Angelina has asked, I think, twice about the scholarship and financial aid. I want to point out a thing that is very often confusing for international students. In general, in the US, when you say financial aid, we refer to the US domestic students, whereas if you do scholarships or merit-based scholarship or international scholarships, it's more what is available to international students. So in general, I think all of us attending here, I know I shouldn't answer for everybody, but we probably have some sort of a scholarship for international students. But federal aid is usually, it's not available to any international students unless if you have a US passport or permanent residency.
I think I can give my own experience here as I am a scholarship holder. But yeah, but I think if you are, it depends on your country. Probably your country provides also a scholarship, and it's good also to check. I know Education US probably provide information about that too. But I know some university also provide scholarship for international students. But I think if you're coming from Russia, for example, or in your country, I know that they provide some scholarship for their people to go to the US. So it's better to check your government's education website.
And check with all the institutions you are planning to apply. So
yes,
find those major courses that are interest to you and check with the appropriate institutions.
And I saw some questions about the requirements for the scholarship. It's totally different thing. For example, if you want to apply for a scholarship and if you want to go apply to the US universities, this is two totally different requirements. So you have to follow one by one. For example, usually the scholarship requirements are like far before the opening for the university. So usually you have to submit the scholarship first, and then you will get accepted for the scholarship. And then at the same time, you will get information from the university. So usually you will have conditional letters from university, we call it.
And I would also put in a plug here. I always tell students to check with the Education USA office in their home country, because those folks typically know what scholarships are available to them by virtue of citizenship, much more so than we would.
Go ahead. Sorry, I was going to add to USA. We're both from fairly large university systems, being the SUNY system, and Temple also being a very large research university. We have extremely complex scholarship situations because we offer merit-based scholarship on the application itself. That is the admission. Then we have applications you can apply for to the admission. Then the college itself, if you're applying for engineering, the College of Engineering has their own money and they're going to issue some scholarships. Then when you come, if you do well as a student, you might get additional scholarships. It is really, I would say, sometimes universities are, I understand the question for scholarship, it is complex. So, and it is difficult to talk about, not because we don't want to tell you, but just because it is at many different levels.
I have an interesting question from the chat. Are the expectations of international students' test scores somehow differ from those of native speakers' scores? Yeah, I think that's a great question.
That's a terrific question. If you are a native English speaker, or if English is your first language, you are not required as an international student to demonstrate English proficiency. We already have that in everything else that you submit. So it is only for a non-native English speaker who is an international applicant, F1, to demonstrate English proficiency.
Patricia, what's your favorite answer to this? Read the website, read the instructions, right? Because there are some universities that are going to give scholarship based on your English scores. There are some where it's just a part of the package where it is included when it is required for you, right? So, but I think the answer to the question, the way that I read it, is that international office very often is going to have a different type of budget for scholarships than the domestic admission if we have a separate office. So technically speaking, the answer is yes, there could be different types of scholarship, but not necessarily in terms of requirements, right? So we're just going to value it in a different way. So the domestic admission might have a $5,000 scholarship if you score 1,400 on the SAT or whatever. And at the international side, because we may have a little bit less money, maybe that same scholarship might be 4,000 or something like that, or vice versa. Sometimes it's the other way around, that that the money, there's a little bit more maybe on the international side than on the domestic side, because we generally get less applications than the domestic side. So it really just depends. But in terms of requirements, Usually the only different requirement is that as a non-native speaker, you normally have to provide some sort of an English proficiency. That is really the only difference from the academic standard, the academic requirement, the test score requirements, if there are requirements.
I would say that from my own experience in admissions over the past 10 years, international admissions, we have spent more time on English proficiency because we want the students that we admit to be successful at our university. And because English is going to be the language of instruction, we want to know that any student that we admit can, with the support that we have from our English Language Institute and from our faculty and from our other offices, we want that student to be successful. And so English proficiency is a very, very important consideration for us. Very important.
Yeah, I think that's the number one issue. Yeah, thank you so much for pointing this out. And we have a question regarding what institutions can help me improve English language with the help of the short courses. I would say that probably every college and every university has some sort of English language courses, right? So I'm sure you have lots of various options of various duration. Is this correct?
Dr. Room, you probably know the answer to this. I don't know how many universities in the US have an ESL program, but
Yeah.
it's a good number. I would say maybe half of all accredited universities, maybe even less than that. Smaller private colleges tend not to have their own IELP program.
So most universities, U.S. universities that have this kind of a language source course, usually they have like English course in their program, like English, for example, ELP in their program, or TESOL in their program, or linguistics in their program. So they usually offer it as an extra for their students. So, but not, I agree, not all of U.S. universities have it. So you'd better check on them.
Not all of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much. And we have another question, maybe again a little bit of the topic, but still we have like 1 minute left. Can the number of additional courses I took during my undergraduate studies help me while applying to graduate programs? Maybe just a quick overview, what you suggest.
What do you mean with additional courses? This is not really like, if it relates to your graduate program gonna be, then it might be useful. But if it doesn't at all, like it doesn't relate anything at all, so I don't think it's useful. For example, if you take chemistry in your undergraduate, and then you want to take another statistics, for example, and you didn't have anything to do with statistics before when you do an undergraduate, so what's the point? So you don't need that. But if you have this correlation between your graduate and undergraduate, then that might be useful. I don't know. Maybe you, Peter and Pat, can add.
I think academic qualification really depends on major to major, but anything additional, I think it's a personal value, right? So it's like you said, that when you go into graduate program, for example, if you're going to medical school and you did some business courses in the undergraduate work, that will probably help you being a better manager as a doctor or a physician. When you're going into that area, will probably help you. But in terms of a calculation to the admission, probably not if it's not part of your traditional curriculum.
Well, again, I would add that this really depends on the program that you're applying to. For example, there's a raging debate as to whether or not, if you're going into the sciences for the PhD, you should take a BA or a BS. And there are faculty who believe it should only be a BA, that the rest of it should come at the graduate level. There are other faculty who will argue that the BS, which would require more coursework, should be taken. So again, you need to look at what is the graduate program to which you are applying, what is their philosophy, what are the requirements for entrance. And that's, to me, to not do that, to just assume, would be a mistake.
Thank you so much. I think we need to wrap up because we're like 4 minutes behind, but I guess the last question. Yeah, we're trying to answer all the questions. So the last question: what should be the honors, and in what format should they be? I mean, I think it's in terms of how to cover up for the test optional thing. What would you think? Like, win a gold medal in the Olympics?
I don't think you can bribe with that, but you know, where I'm going to refer to Patricia's favorite answer, it really, you know, in terms of the value of what you've taken, it really comes in many different forms and shapes. When we're talking about honors at the high school level, right, that is something that usually comes from achieving a higher level. So depending on if you, for example, have a higher level of courses that you can take, and then if you get honors in that, then we can obviously see that your academic standard is at a higher level. If the question is more about honors, as in getting into honors college at the admission level, then that is something that is part of that holistic calculation that we're making, and primarily in most respect to that, your academic achievement, whether you get invited up front into becoming an honors student. But really a lot of different answers to that question.
Thank you so much. I think we need to wrap up. Thank you so much, our esteemed speakers, and thank you, dear participants. So if you have your questions unanswered, so please go to the booth of our dear esteemed representatives of 100 colleges and universities, and please ask those questions directly. And also you can always visit our Education USA booth to get some guidance in case you are lost or don't know how to approach question. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Tatiana, and
Thank
thank
you.
you, Education
Thank
USA,
you.
for hosting this
Thank you
event.
so
Yes.
much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a great rest
Bye.
of your day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.